Hi everybody, this is drawninjakc, and today we're going to learn how to draw water drops so realistic you're going to feel as if you can touch them. That's how realistic these water drops are going to be. But first, I'd like to give a shout out to Rohit Animates. Check out his channel, and if you like what you see, show him some love by subscribing. Now, starting with the thin lines that are going to basically define the shapes of the water drops. You want to make sure that the lines that you're drawing to indicate the shapes of the water drops are very thin. So I'm actually using my 0.5 millimeter mechanical pencil right now so that the lines are so thin that they hardly even can be registered by the eye. Now for the shadows on the side of the water drops, I'm using a color pencil. I mean, you can use a regular pencil or a color pencil. Right now I have a color pencil at hand, and I'm basically just using the shadowed part of the water drops. I'm just coloring the shadow part of the water drops very lightly, because when I start to blend it, it's going to get darker. And I'm leaving little spots to indicate where the highlights are going to be. Strangely enough, the darker part of the water drop is where the light source is, or where the light is entering the water drop. But because of how the light bounces around inside of the drop, it makes it dark and it makes the other side very light. So right here, I'm just basically now starting to blend the shadowed side, and it's getting a little darker because I'm using a colorless blender pencil. So because it's color pencil, when you start to blend, it gets a little darker, and that's what I want. With a regular graphite pencil, you may not get this effect when you start to use like a blending stump or with your finger. But with a color pencil, it does get a little darker. Now the trick here is to seamlessly blend the dark side of the water drop into the middle of the water drop and let it just kind of fade into the middle tone. And of course, the middle tone is the tone of the paper that I'm using right now, which is a gray tone paper. But you want the dark shadowed side to kind of seamlessly blend into that tone paper, so there are no hard lines towards the center of the water drop. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of softening the edges of the black color pencil that I laid down towards the middle of the water drop so that it just blends seamlessly. So right here is where I start to add a darker tone at the edge of the water drop on the dark side to sharpen up the water drop, and also to intensify the three-dimensional look of it, because the closer it gets to the surface of the paper, the darker it gets on that side. And this also helps in the gradual transition from the dark side to the mid-tone of the paper. Although I left the little spots to indicate the highlights, you don't really have to keep them there because you can go over them with a gel pen, which is what I'm going to do. But at this point, I'm going to start on the other side with the highlights. Now you can do that with a white color pencil. And this is where also the same concept that you use for the dark side, you use for the light side comes in, whereas you start the darkest point at the closest part to the surface and then gradually blend it into the mid-tone of the paper. I really enjoy doing these like water drops. I mean, they're so good for so many different aspects of art. I mean, you can do a picture of someone looking through a rainy window where this would come in handy. You can do a drop of water kind of coming off of a leaf in nature. You know, there's so many different aspects to art that you can use the realistic water drop concept to. So I think knowing it is very important. I think it's there are great ways for you to embellish your artwork with it. I think there are great ways for you to embellish your artwork with it, or just use the water drops itself as an artwork. You don't really have to add anything, because if you make them realistic looking enough, then you can also just embellish just a blank piece of paper with them and make them look awesome. So after you do the highlighted side of the water drops, and you, of course, it's very important to, as I mentioned before, just gradually go from a intense highlighted part to a faded mid-tone part. After you do the highlighted part, now it's time to do the shadows on the side of the highlights. And how I do this is basically just put a line on the side of the highlights, and those lines are actually going to get faded outwards. Blend them until they fade into the gray tone paper or the paper, but it can't be a really deep shadow. It has to be a subtle shadow and then a subtle fading. So because of the light bouncing around inside the water drop, there will be reflections of light coming out of the water drop within the shadows that you made at the side of the water drop. So you're gonna have to use a white color pencil, or maybe, depending on what you're using, if it's a graphite pencil, you're gonna have to use an eraser to just kind of erase those little sections so that it looks like the water drop is reflecting light onto the shadow. And the most important, the piece de resistance, basically, is the highlight that I'm doing now with the gel pen to make this thing look super realistic. And those highlights is what really kind of pulls this whole thing together. At this point now, those highlights are making these water drops look so realistic that you already feel like you can basically just touch them. And with water drops, highlights are everything. So now, as a final touch, you can take the gel pen and put highlights on the highlights, which actually makes this look even more intense and more realistic. So on the white side of the water drops, it's okay and encouraged to embellish it a little bit with little white lines of highlights as well, because the gel pen highlights are more intense than the color pencil highlights, so it does make a difference. So now I'm going to create a diagram of a water drop, so it would make it easier for you to basically do your water drops, understanding the concept of where the light goes, where the shadow goes, and where the highlight goes. I'm going to make it easy by just making a circle and indicating the first line would be where the shadows would go. And this would mean the dark side of the diagram. So from there, from the end of the circle to that point of the circle is where the shadow goes. And then you blend that into the middle. Now from this part of the circle to the end of the circle is basically where the highlights are going to go. And then you blend that middle part of the highlights into the middle of the circle. And right here is where the shadow that the water drop creates is going to go. And again, that's the smallest shadow that you'll have. So it's outside of the circle. Going back to the dark side of the water drop, we'll make 2 circles for highlights. And over here on the other side of the circle, we'll make this line for that will indicate the light penetrating through the water drop onto the shadow. And this diagram should make it easy for you to approach the water drop. Now that you have all the tools to make an awesome looking water drop or bunch of water drops, I'd like to see how your water drops come out. You can post it on my Discord in the art channel in a section called Water Drop Challenge. Also, you can find the invite link to my Discord in the info section under this video. Okay, so I'm looking forward to seeing everybody's water drop challenge, and I will do a video and I will critique your water drops. This is drawninjakc saying, I'll see you next time.